Hello everyone, welcome to the Donor Research Network Symposium series. My name is Antoine Beurel-Tréhan. I am an organizational psychologist and a researcher at the French Blood Establishment. I completed a PhD in psychology working on plasma donation behavior, and specifically I investigated motivations and barriers to donate plasma among whole blood donors in order to develop applied methods to convince them to switch to plasma donation. For this talk, I will present to you the results of two experimental studies conducted among whole blood donors in France. These studies were conducted during my PhD, and before I start, I would like to acknowledge the contribution of my colleagues to this work. The research was carried out under the direction of Florence Terrade, a PhD in health psychology at the University of Rennes, Bruno Danic, medical degree and head of our regional branch of the French Blood Establishment, and Jean-Pierre Lebaudy, head of communication and marketing of our regional branch. Studies on blood donation behaviors have mainly focused on the theory of planned behavior, and some extensions of the model have been suggested over time to improve its ability to predict intention to donate. Specific motivations and deterrence can be associated to the factors of the TPB, and for example, measures of attitudes evaluate the perceived altruism and utility of donation, which are the main motivations to donate, and perceived or anticipated pain, which are intrinsic barriers to donation. Behavioral control evaluates more general feelings of self-efficacy and extrinsic barriers to donation, such as the time required for a plasma donation. And to complete the TPB, some factors can be added, such as measures of moral norms or donor identity, which evaluate how much donors have internalized donation behavior, measures of anticipated regrets or more generally anticipated effects regarding donations, or measures of anxiety using, for example, the blood donor anxiety scale. Finally, it has been shown that the donation environment has an impact on the quality of the donor's experience and therefore on their probability of coming back. We developed a scale to measure the perceived friendliness of the staff, the donation site, and the general ambience during the donation. Now, while donors' motivations to donate plasma seems to be basically the same as their motivations to donate whole blood, meaning they are driven by the fact their donation will save lives, they tend to perceive more barriers for plasma than for whole blood donation. Apart from the time required for plasma donation, this behavior is often associated with false representations. For example, people often believe that 2 needles are required for plasma donation, or sometimes they even believe that plasma is collected from bone puncture. They also tend to feel that the increased donation frequency implies that they will have to donate more frequently. And we managed to replicate these observations among French samples of non-donors, whole blood donors, and plasma donors. So the extended model of the TPB was supposed to develop our understanding of intention to donate, and our first study used this model to evaluate whether a promotional approach focusing on alleviating barriers to donation was more efficient to increase intention to donate plasma than the standard approach of the French Blood Establishment, which focused on the needs for plasma donation. However, research has shown that individuals who declare strong intention to perform behavior do not always act on it. This could be partly explained by a lack of anticipation of opportunities or obstacles to the execution of the behavior, or by competing behavioral intentions when the time comes. By asking individuals to anticipate precisely when, where, and how they will perform the behavior, the implementation intentions technique is supposed to strengthen the link between intention and behavior. Yet we did not find many studies in the literature that applied implementation intentions to a blood donation context. And that's why our second study combined an implementation intentions protocol with the experimental approach to evaluate its relevance in a blood donation setting. So drawing on this data and from previous experiments conducted on whole blood donor recruitment that evaluated experimental communication strategies, we developed, as I said, an approach focusing on donors' barriers to donate plasma, which we call the donor-centered approach, that we compared to the usual approach at the French Blood Establishment, focusing on the needs for plasma, that we call the patient-centered approach. We believe that if we manage to reduce perceived barriers to donation instead of increasing motivations to donate, we would in consequence observe a higher intentions and probability of engagement in plasma donation. So in this design, engagement means that donors agreed to be called back to make an appointment for a future plasma donation. After reading the document they were given, whole blood donors participated to a survey assessing the variables from the extended model of the TPB, and we expected participants in the experimental approach condition to show lower scores of anxiety, higher behavioral control and intentions, and also to be more likely to commit to donate plasma in the next month. However, due to the limitation of intentions when it comes to the prediction of behavior, we did not expect this approach would impact the likelihood of donors acting on their engagement. In a control condition, participants were not given any information regarding plasma donation and was simply asked to participate to the survey. A few months later, we conducted a second study in which we deployed the experimental approach. Only this time, half of the participants were assigned to an experimental condition completed with an implementation intentions protocol. The aim of this protocol, as I said earlier, was to reinforce the approach by increasing the likelihood of donors turning their engagement into an actual plasma donation. So to sum up, in both studies, we had three ways of measuring the efficacy of our approach. First, by evaluating the scores obtained by our participants to the under variables of our model. Second, by comparing the likelihood of engagement in each condition. And finally, by comparing the transformation of engagements into actual donations. In the first study, we collected data from 433 participants assigned to one of the three conditions. In the replication, we had 309 participants assigned to one of two conditions. And in each study, around 58% of participants were women, and the samples were 27 to 29 years old on average. So our analysis showed that when taking into account all variables of our model, the strongest predictors of intention, to donate plasma among whole blood donors were anticipated regrets, anxiety, and perceived behavioral control. Subjective norms and perceived donation environment were associated with intention, but only marginally. And measures of moral norms, donor identity, and attitudes were not significantly associated with intention. So that was for the model of study 1. And here is the final model extracted from the second study, in which we can see that we replicated the main associations from the first study, and the only variations observed are with the marginally associated variables. So we are pretty confident in saying that factors evaluating barriers to plasma donation appeared more determinant of intention than variables evaluating motivations. When comparing standard experimental and control conditions on these variables, we showed that participants who received the donor-centered approach declared less anxiety and more anticipated regrets and intention to donate. We did not, however, show any significant effect on behavioral control. We also showed that these donors were more likely to commit to donating plasma in the following month, with almost 50% of engagements in the experimental conditions against 30% in the standard condition. Finally, no significant differences were found, as we expected, regarding actual plasma donation, with around 40% of engagements transformed into donations in each condition. Now, if we look at the same analysis for the second study, we replicated the effect observed in study 1 on engagement, with 60% of participants committing to donating plasma in the next 2 months. We did not manage, however, to show an effect of implementation intentions on the behavior, with around 45% of engagements turning into plasma donation, as for study 1. With these experimental designs, we demonstrated that donor-centered communication strategies were more efficient than patient-centered strategies to increase intention and convert whole blood donors to plasma donation. We believe that it is mostly explained by the absence of specific and strong motivations to donate plasma, while donors easily identify specific barriers to plasma donation. Even though we did not increase the probability of donors acting on their engagement, we still managed to almost double the likelihood of these commitments, which we believe is a win. And as I said earlier in this presentation, this work was designed with the aim to develop new communication strategies and practices for the staff at the French blood establishment. And even though we are confident that these 2 studies provide evidence to support donor-centered strategies, the design was experimental and cannot be considered as an organizational practice. In order to fully demonstrate the efficacy of this approach, we are now working with the staff to operationalize this design into an actual practice and evaluate the outcomes in conversion and its integration into an everyday routine by the staff. Thank you for your time and the interest you've shown in our research. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email me at the address displayed on the last slide. I will be more than happy to respond.